A man who survived one of the most horrific events of the Second World War comes home and finds he can no longer experience time in a normal, straight line. He becomes, in his own mind, unstuck in time, jumping without warning between his past, his present, his future, and even an imagined abduction by aliens. That is the disorienting structure of Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five, published in 1969, a novel about war, trauma, and the human attempt to survive the unsurvivable. It is strange, funny, sad, and unlike almost any other book. And buried inside its oddness is one of the most honest portraits ever written of what trauma actually does to a person, and a strange little phrase that, read carefully, holds a surprisingly deep lesson for anyone in 2026 trying to carry something heavy. Here is what feels strange about how this book works. On the surface, the time travel and the aliens make it look like science fiction, a quirky fantasy. But Vonnegut, who himself survived the firebombing of Dresden as a prisoner of war, was not writing escapism. He was writing trauma from the inside. The fractured, nonlinear structure of the book, the way the narrator jumps uncontrollably between moments, is not a gimmick. It is an astonishingly accurate depiction of how a traumatized mind actually experiences time, pulled back again and again into the past, unable to keep the unbearable memory in its place. The aliens, the time jumps, the dark humor are all the mind's desperate, creative attempts to cope with something too horrific to face directly. Vonnegut found a way to write the truth of trauma by writing it sideways, because looking at it head-on was unbearable, which is exactly the point. Let me reframe the whole book around its most famous phrase. Throughout the novel, every single time death appears, and it appears constantly, the narrator responds with the same three flat words: so it goes. A person dies, so it goes. A massacre occurs, so it goes. Champagne goes flat. A city burns. Millions perish, so it goes. We can read this as cold, fatalistic, even numb, but there is something far more complex happening. So it goes is the sound of a mind trying to survive an amount of death and horror that no human being is built to process. It is not really indifference. It is the protective response of someone who has seen too much, a way of acknowledging each loss without being completely destroyed by it. It is, in its strange way, the sound of someone choosing to keep going. To understand the depth of this, you have to understand what Vonnegut was actually carrying. He survived the destruction of an entire city, the deaths of tens of thousands of people, an event of such scale and horror that ordinary language and ordinary storytelling simply could not contain it. He tried for years to write about it directly, and could not. The book that finally emerged is fractured, evasive, and strange, precisely because the truth it is circling cannot be approached in a straight line. This is one of the most important things the book teaches about trauma. Sometimes the unbearable cannot be faced directly, all at once. It can only be approached sideways, in pieces, with humor and distance and strange detours, because the mind protects itself from what would otherwise overwhelm it. The strangeness of the book is not a flaw, it is the shape that survival takes. Psychology confirms, in clinical detail, what Vonnegut rendered in fiction. Trauma genuinely disrupts a person's sense of time.
Intrusive memories pull the mind back into the past as if the event were happening again. The traumatized brain does not file the experience neatly away as something that is over. It keeps it live, present, unstuck. Survivors often describe exactly the fractured, nonlinear time that Vonnegut built his book around. And the numbing, the flatness, the so it goes is also a recognized response, an emotional protection that allows a person to keep functioning in the face of what would otherwise be unendurable. Vonnegut was not inventing a quirky structure. He was reporting, with painful accuracy, what it is actually like to survive the unsurvivable and carry it afterward. Now bring this into 2026, because while most of us have not survived a firebombing, the book speaks to anyone carrying something heavy. We live in an age of widely shared trauma, of accumulated griefs and shocks, of a constant stream of catastrophe delivered to us through our screens, more death and horror than the human mind was ever designed to absorb. And many people are quietly carrying private, unbearable things, losses, abuses, shocks that have left their own sense of time and self fractured. Vonnegut's book offers a strange kind of companionship to all of them. It says, without preaching, that the mind's odd ways of coping are not madness, but survival, that approaching the unbearable sideways is sometimes the only way to approach it at all, and that so it goes, said gently, can be a way of continuing to live in a world that contains too much loss to fully process. There is an idea in Uzbek culture that grief shared is grief halved, that the weight no single person can carry becomes bearable when it is not carried alone. Vonnegut's whole book is, in a sense, an act of sharing a weight he could not carry by himself, handing his unbearable memory to the reader so that it might be lighter for having been spoken. The fractured, sideways way he tells it does not make it less true. It makes it possible to tell at all.
And in reading it, we take a small share of the weight, which is perhaps the deepest function of literature about suffering. It lets the unbearable be borne together. But here is the subtle wisdom that keeps the book from being merely bleak, and it is easy to miss under the dark humor. So it goes is not actually surrender. The narrator keeps living. He keeps telling the story. He keeps finding moments of tenderness, absurdity, and even beauty amid the horror. The phrase is not a giving up. It is a strange kind of acceptance that makes continuing possible, a way of acknowledging that terrible things happen, that much of it is beyond our control, and that we must somehow keep going anyway. There is even a quiet instruction buried in the book to focus on the good moments, to dwell in the times that were beautiful rather than only in the times that were unbearable. Vonnegut is not telling you that nothing matters. He is showing you how a person keeps living when they have seen things that could have stopped them. And that is a kind of hope, even if it wears a strange and flattened face. I want to add a careful and genuinely important word, because this book sits directly on the subject of trauma, which many people carry in real and serious ways. Vonnegut's sideways, numbing, so it goes survival was one human being's way of coping with the unbearable, and the book is a portrait of that, not a prescription. If you are carrying trauma, the protective numbness the book describes can help a person survive, but real healing usually needs more than survival, and more than carrying it alone. Trauma responds to genuine support, to being witnessed safely, often to professional help. So if something in this story resonates because you are carrying your own unbearable thing, please hear this clearly. Surviving it sideways was Vonnegut's necessity,
but you do not have to face yours in isolation. And reaching toward real support is not weakness. It is the next step beyond mere survival toward actually being able to live. Read Slaughterhouse-Five again, not as a strange science fiction novel about time travel and aliens, but as one of the most honest books ever written about trauma and the human struggle to survive the unbearable. It gives you language for the way horror fractures time, for the sideways approach the mind takes to what it cannot face directly, for the strange protective grace of "so it goes," and it leaves you with a companionship rather than a lecture. Whatever heavy thing you are carrying, Vonnegut's book quietly tells you that the odd shapes survival takes are not madness, that the unbearable is often best approached in pieces and not alone, and that it is possible, even after seeing too much, to keep telling the story, to keep finding the beautiful moments, and to keep going. So it goes, and still, somehow, we go on. There is a further dimension to Vonnegut's approach that is worth drawing out because it offers something genuinely useful for carrying any heavy thing. Notice that the book survives its unbearable subject through humor. Vonnegut writes about mass death with jokes, absurdity, and a strange gentleness, and this is not disrespect. It is one of the oldest and most human tools for surviving the unsurvivable. Dark humor, the ability to find something to laugh at even in the middle of horror, is a recognized and powerful coping mechanism, a way of keeping a small piece of yourself free and alive when circumstances would otherwise crush you completely. Vonnegut's comedy is not a denial of the tragedy. It is a refusal to let the tragedy have the final, total word. It is a way of saying that even here, even in the worst of it, the human spirit can still find a crack of light, a moment of absurdity, a reason to keep breathing. This matters for anyone carrying weight in 2026 because we are often told that seriousness is the only respectful response to suffering, that to laugh in the face of something terrible is to diminish it. Vonnegut gently disagrees. He shows that humor can be a form of survival, a way of staying human when the world has become inhuman, a method for holding the unbearable at exactly the distance that lets you keep living with it. The person who can find something to laugh at in their darkest hour is not being callous. They are doing something profound and protective, refusing to let the darkness consume every last part of them. So it goes, said with a wry and weary half-smile, is not surrender. It is a small, stubborn act of survival, a way of acknowledging the horror while quietly insisting that you are still here, still able to find the absurd, still able, somehow, to go on. And there is a deep and quiet hope in that, the hope that no matter how heavy the thing you carry, some irreducible spark of you can remain free enough to keep living. Tell me in the comments, do you read So It Goes as numb resignation or as a strange kind of acceptance that makes survival possible? If you want more deep dives that turn the stories you think you know inside out, subscribe and check the description for further reading. One honest note before you go. This video uses AI-generated audio and visuals, and it offers reflection, not professional advice. This story touches the heavy subject of trauma, and if it resonated because of something you are carrying, please treat that as worth sharing with someone you trust or a professional rather than facing it alone. This was just one reader's thoughts offered to make you think.